Welcome to the sixth session of our 2022 to 2023 Heritage and Colonialism Discussion Group. This year's program centers around the theme Legacies of Injustice. The theme encompasses a broad range of injustices in both the past and the present, which are connected to a complex web of colonial issues. Without further delay, we would like to warmly welcome today's speakers, Mark Elliott, Arkotong Longkumer and Dolly Kikon. Mark Elliott is Senior Curator in Anthropology at MAA with responsibility for the Asian, European and African ethnography collections. Arkotong Longkumer is the Senior Lecturer in Modern Asia at the University of Edinburgh, and Dolly Kikon is an Associate Professor at the Anthropology and Development Studies Programme in Melbourne, Australia. Today's topic is Museums and Northeast India, Decolonising Narratives from the Indian Borderland. This session will draw attention to the material objects from Northeast India housed at the MAA and the historical colonial circumstance which led them to the museum's possession. It will bring together the speakers' varied works and experiences with the aim to add to the conversations on museums, repatriation, community healing, and what curatorial practices centered on community knowledge and experiences in Northeast India could look like. Welcome, speakers. Dolly, if you'd like to begin.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. I am just going to keep my timer so that I know what I'm doing. All right. Okay. Thank you so much. I wanted to just reflect on my own journey and how I got here with my friends, students and co-travelers thinking about museums, thinking about heritage. I don't have that kind of background. A large part of my life was spent in the human rights movement around Indigenous people's rights, and particularly with the issue of militarization. So I'm very grateful to my colleague Arkotong for being my teacher and teaching me about heritage and museums. So he's the person actually I'm going to look up to in this conversation. But perhaps what I can do for starting off the conversation for us today is to give you all a background on how we came to be where we are as the Naga team, and that is to do with our ongoing dialogue, collaboration and partnership with the Pitt Rivers Museum. So I'm very grateful to the curators at the Pitt Rivers Museum, and especially to the director, Dr. Laura, for being a friend and for truly showing the Naga people and also the world what it truly means to be an ally and to work in solidarity. This is a partnership based on, I think, respect, or focusing on healing and reconciliation. And for the Naga team, that was the frame of mind that we had when we wanted to start having this conversation about Naga people's heritage. And particularly for me, I would like to focus on the dialogue about the Naga ancestral human remains, which are at the Pitt Rivers Museum. So this conversation started, I would say, around 2020. In the middle of the pandemic. It started with an email between myself and Dr. Laura about the Pitt Rivers Museum's process of decolonization, which was very, very clearly put out on the museum website and also was carried by international newspapers. These started perhaps exchanges between not only myself and Laura, but after a point brought in teams, curators from the museum at Pitt Rivers, and also Naga elders, cultural associations, church bodies, and researchers like myself who were thinking about what's the path forward. As 2020 came to an end, by 2021, we began to think about officially launching a conversation or a team to look at this. There were quite a lot of things that I had to unlearn as a Naga anthropologist myself. So I have a background in law, and then I went on to study anthropology. One of the things that I kept saying, which my elders would correct me, and this really led to a process of introspection for me as well, a journey of unlearning, was the term project that I would associate with the initiative. And it really made me think about words, about terms, and how we were dwelling on such processes. In my own case, it really helped me because I was based in Melbourne at the time, in Australia. And the Australian conversations around heritage and ancestral human remains is a deep one and also a very enriching one. And that's something that I was looking forward to in terms of both spiritually and emotionally preparing for this journey. I would like to say for me and also for my team, the Naga researchers, elders, cultural associations, this has been quite an amazing learning journey. We don't have a map. This is the first time that the Naga people, or I would say even across the Indian subcontinent, indigenous peoples are trying to have a dialogue on repatriation, which is connected with healing and reconciliation. So this is a huge one for us. And in the last 2 years or so, one of the things that we have learned has been to listen to the people, and that's the Naga people. The first piece that we began to write as we prepared to make this journey official was the essay titled The Unfinished Business of Colonization. So I will not spend time reading out what that essay meant, but if you just go to the internet and type either Arko's name or my name and the title, The Unfinished Business of Colonization, Naga Ancestral Remains and the Healing of the Land. This is a piece that really captures the history of how we all came together. The couple of things that I want to say about this, history becomes very, very important to understand the Naga legacy of the artifacts, the cultural artifacts, including the human remains that we are talking about. In my own case, I learned that the Pitt Rivers Museum has the largest collection, the Naga collection in the world, I think numbering at 6,466 items. Out of that, approximately 213 items are ancestral human remains. And then there is also a gray zone where, as we have learned, hair, pieces of teeth, which are stuck to baskets, weaved into different kinds of material artifacts, really also in many of the museums categorized as ancestral human remains, but I guess within the larger museum context, needs to be kind of reflected on. So that's something that we are continuing to learn about this. What also really opened my eyes to this process was my colleague, Dr. Arkotong Longkumer's expertise and his knowledge and wisdom to bring us into this conversation. I learned through him that it was not only the Pitt Rivers Museum that had huge Naga collections, it was also the Cambridge University Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, which houses Naga collections, and also the Horniman Museum. And besides that, there are apparently over 50 museums in Britain alone that houses Naga collections. And then we can go over to Germany and to Austria, to Switzerland. It is amazing, I felt, as a Naga anthropologist, as a people that has, I think, really gone through a colonial violence and continues to experience the unfinished business of colonization. We are looking at artifacts, we are looking at this kind of colonial heritage, and at the same time, linking it not to violence and to anger, but looking at healing. And I would say that that vision comes from Naga elders, which is very, very dear to us, and which is very, very, I think, precious during these times where Naga political history itself is going through a huge transformation. Maybe let me spend around 2 more minutes here reflecting on now and what are we doing. So if you want to know more about the Naga team and what we are doing, there is a website that I want you all to look at, and I'll just put that on the chat as well. It's called, we called ourselves, as we came together in the last 2 years, the Return, Restore and Decolonize. So RRaD, RRaD, the RRaD team. And it includes Naga practitioners, seminarians, students, Naga elders. Here in this process, it is the Forum for Naga Reconciliation, FNR, who is the facilitator, who is guiding us through these conversations. One of the things that we have been able to do is first, in the first round, do a survey, interviews about what is this process of repatriation and what does Naga ancestral human remains or Naga material artifacts mean to the Naga people. And this was a survey that we wrapped up in 2021 with groups of Naga people. It was the middle of the pandemic, so we did it through Zoom, and in some cases we were also able to meet people in person. At this moment, we are looking at the second phase of the initiative, where there has been very deep dialogues and deep listening among the Naga people themselves. One of the things that we realized was, how do we understand in an indigenous context the process of decolonization, or what does colonization even mean when there has been so many layers of violence? And remember, we're actually looking at this outside of campuses like Yale, where I'm a visiting fellow right now, or Cambridge, or even Oxford. We're looking really at Naga villages, at Naga people, Naga groups, where we have experienced deep militarization and historical violence, even after India's independence in 1947. So in our second phase, terms like decolonization have surfaced, and we are beginning to slowly listen to one another. And like I emphasized, listening is very important for us in this journey, and also learning together becomes very important. The third point that's important for us as the Naga team is to unlearn. So the process of unlearning what we have been through has been core and key. So it's maybe around 11 minutes. I'll stop here, but I'll just put the link to the RRaD website here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolly. Now we'll go on to Mark's presentation.
Thank you, everyone. So I hope everyone can see the screen. I just want to say, so thank you so much to Shraddha in particular for bringing us all together, and to the Heritage and Colonialism Discussion Group for hosting us, and especially to Arko and Dolly for joining us here. I'm very conscious that I'm the least knowledgeable person on this panel about what I'm going to talk about, so I'm going to try to be brief. I just want to give a sense of what the collections from Northeast India are that MAA cares for, and what has been done with them to date, and I suppose to say a little bit about my way into the collections as a curator and a researcher. I would like to think about, if time allows, or perhaps in the discussion, about a couple of objects in particular, to tease out some of the stories they can tell, and to think about what should be done with these collections now and in the future, and potentially more importantly, who should be doing it. So hopefully I can move my slides there. So a lot of this started with me. I've been curator for Asia, Africa, and Europe at MAA, which is nonsense and outrageous, and the second most colonial job title in the museum, since 2012. My first exhibition, major exhibition here, was Buddha's Word in 2014, which I co-curated with Hildegard Dienberger and Michaela Clemente, looking at the life of books in Tibet and beyond. Really, when I started here, the Asian collections generally were really invisible and under-researched. And so this is the context in which I'll be talking today. The exhibition displayed printed books, manuscripts, and artifacts from India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, as well as Tibet, Myanmar, China, Mongolia, and Japan, and was really the first exhibition in Cambridge for a generation to display artifacts from Asia and particularly South Asia. The last exhibition to have focused on the region had been the Nagas, curated by Julian Jacobs, Alan McFarlane, Anita Hurley, and others at MAA in 1990. This project, and I use the word project advisedly following Dolly, reopened the museum after a long renovation, took place at a time when much of Northeast India, and Nagaland in particular, was inaccessible to overseas researchers. Something that the curators and authors were acutely conscious of. The result was an accumulation of collections that had ended up in the UK and represented and a representation, though not an uncritical or unself-conscious one, of the narratives of the European men and women who had collected these objects and written about them. In addition to the exhibition, the project produced a book, Julian Jacobs' The Nagas, which has remained a fairly recurring resource, and also an experimental video disc, which then was a cutting-edge technology and is now almost entirely forgotten, which collected images and metadata about collections from museums and private collections across the UK, with the intention of returning these to Nagaland. Arguably, this is a pioneering exercise in what we would now refer to as digital repatriation, but I think part of the experience of working with these collections at MAA is frankly, the lack of success in this information reaching the communities that it was intended for. I believe the video disc in question and the video disc player that accompanied it was tracked down a few years ago at the museum in Kohima. But again, while the video disc, for example, has had an afterlife as online for several years, getting this information, getting the often fractured and fragmentary information that we have to the communities who really need it has been a challenge. So, as I say, I took up the post of curator at MAA in 2012 in the immediate aftermath of another redevelopment of the museum, and my portfolio of responsibilities covered, as I say, most places and most people. Curating Buddha's Word had been an opportunity to investigate, in a way that could only ever scratch the surface, the rich collections from India and across South Asia that had gone largely unresearched and certainly underdisplayed for decades. But after that project, I wanted to take this exploration further, to begin a survey of South Asian collections at MAA, and to make them visible, and to begin to review and challenge the narratives that had accompanied them in the museum. Funding was, of course, unavailable for such an exploration, although this kind of exploration, this kind of primary work on collections in museums is extraordinarily necessary for us, for the community stakeholders worldwide, and for projects like we're talking about today. But in the absence of that funding, the museum and I decided to produce an exhibition which would provide an opportunity to investigate lesser known parts of the collections at MAA. So in 2017, we opened the exhibition Another India. The project allowed us to investigate more than 2,000 objects in the MAA collections, to explore provenances and stories behind the objects and of the men and women who had caused them to end up in a small university town in East Anglia, and to commission new artworks from Indigenous and Adivasi artists and makers across India that responded to the collections, their histories, and to the museum. And there's a book accompanying this, which is available at bargain basement cut price rates from the museum several years on after the show, and information about the exhibition is available online and through the MAA catalogue. I wanted really just to give an overview of what we're talking about here. So I did a little bit of investigation in the museum records. There are 4,464 catalogue records from India, of which about 920 are from northeast India. In terms of the places represented, so there are 49 records from Arunachal, 206 records from Assam, 62 from Manipur, small number from Meghalaya and Mizoram, and 572 from Nagaland. So although the most significant in terms of the northeastern collections, and I think for many reasons the most visible aspect of the India collections at MAA, still relatively compact compared to Oxford, for example. And 18 artifacts from Sikkim. In terms of the peoples represented, the collections come from 36 identified peoples, half of which are Naga communities. Now, we have made efforts to correct and update the names of groups, removing or contextualizing historic names which are now obsolete or offensive. But obviously this work is incomplete. And I just want to say here that we would welcome advice and correction about anything that people see here. About 120 of the catalogue records, so about 13% of the total, are not yet attributed to any people and community. And so for anyone that wants to, and I would encourage people to please investigate and interrogate the museum catalogue database. All the museum catalogue records are online with images of currently about 60,000 of the 160,000 records on the database. Our catalogue works on the basis of, we aim for radical transparency. We're trying to provide all the information that we have associated with objects and images as we go through making them. The real value of this, as far as we are concerned, is to enable people across the world to know what there is. You know, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about obviously thinking about repatriation, return, greater community access, but that is fundamentally impossible if people don't know what is in museums. And there are myths and fragmentary information that circulates about these collections, and as Dolly said, I think collections that we're talking about end up in all sorts of places that aren't necessarily visible. So the first step for us is to get this information online. But I think we've recognized over the decades of this kind of work that unmediated, that doesn't go far enough. You know, that actually just dumping data online isn't sufficient. And so fieldwork, engagement, consultations, really sort of presenting the collections that we have is absolutely critical. And I know I'm rambling on, so I'll try to cut this down. I just wanted to run through a couple of the examples. Thinking about the stories that these collections convey. These are two Adi objects from the early 20th century. The hat described as a Mimak Makling Lumpro, which is a terrible pronunciation, but it's catalogued as a war helmet, was taken from a group of Padam Adi people during the Abor expedition, punitive expedition, punitive raid by British forces in 1911 to 1912. It was given to the museum by Colonel Charles Somerset, who was said to have been on the expeditionary force by his wife, who formally handed over the objects. Although it has to be said, no record has ever been found of Colonel Somerset being on the expedition. And to some extent, this story for me highlights both obviously the colonial, militaristic and investigative origins of many of the collections at MAA, but also the fragmentary and not always reliable nature of a lot of the evidence. There's quite a lot of myth and supposition and misunderstanding to sift through as we work through this. One donor who we do know was on the expeditionary force was Isaac Henry Burkill, who donated this spindle whorl, and which he said was taken from an Abor house. Burkill was a naturalist, a botanist, and was formerly a curator, the assistant curator at the Cambridge Botanic Garden, and would ultimately be director of the Singapore Botanic Garden. So, emphasizing the connections between the sort of colonial, military, ethnographic, natural, scientific complex or complexes that produce a lot of these collections. Many of the objects do come from organized, state-sponsored missions into different parts of the Northeast. This dhow was collected by a railway engineer, Norman Spencer, who was working on the railhead in Assam, and he said that a group of Naga men came down from the hills to see what all the fuss was about. I think that's I suppose we could question the exactly what the circumstances of that encounter were, and we could also wonder what was exchanged in this process. But this does signify something like a sort of ad hoc encounter with an exchange that resulted, which is kind of fascinating. I think all of this, though, really presents for me how like the Julian Jacobs book, like Another India, almost all of our data historically has been from the mainly white, mainly European, mainly male collectors that have collected this data, and it's a process it's a challenge to try to use that information, use that data as a step to restoring restoring agency of the makers, the communities, the stakeholders in these collections. And I've hit almost 15 minutes, so I'm probably going to meander and stop and hand over to Arko, who will say more sensible things. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So over to Arkotong's presentation.
Thank you so much. Can I share the screen now after you, Mark, if that's
yeah,
okay?
Sorry, trying to find, yeah, there you go. Right, I'm done.
While I'm screen sharing, yeah, I just want to say that I did attend the exhibition that you put up, Mark, and it was great. And thank you for inviting me and hosting me and showing me around. And I also remember kind of Alan McFarlane giving me the video disc many years ago, and have no idea how to play it yet and kind of open it and access it. So I have it in my office as a kind of relic of this kind of digitization process. What I want to do is not talk so much. So, I mean, I've got two hats on here. I think the organizers were interested for Dolly and I to talk a bit more about the Ancestral Remains project. And I also have another project, which is the digital repatriation. So I won't talk so much about that because the project has just started and we are still thinking about how to do it. And I also noticed that a couple of my project team members are here, Claire Harris and Gaurav Rajkova. So I'm going to talk primarily about the Ancestral Remains project. And I want to kind of emphasize two aspects of what we have been doing. The first one is the like website. Now, so like Dolly has spoken a bit more about the context of the like Naga ancestral like remains and how we started. And I think, as we were doing the project, we were quite interested or keen to kind of disseminate this to a like wider audience. So, I mean, of course, we can sit and talk, and, we can talk with the Pitt Rivers Museum and like Naga elders and so on, but how do we really kind of disseminate this to the public? So the two of the like resources that we thought about were primarily that of the like website. Now the RRaD team, which is the kind of Recover, Restore and Decolonise, and I can also see that Akam has joined us from India as well, was primarily a platform to bring together our different interests and to consolidate, all of these kind of different interests under one platform. And we decided to come up with this website with a very like Naga pattern, as you can see, which is the kind of beadwork of a human like figurine, primarily from the eastern part of like Nagaland. And we were kind of influenced by a couple of the like websites that we have come across, and also that we have been collaborating and talking with. And so this is the Australian kind of Aborigines group called the Return, Reconcile and like Renew. And we sort of liked their like website, the feel of it, because it was an archive, of all the audio as well as like video testimonies, around these ancestral remains. And there was also a lot of information kind of in this like website, but also the kind of responsible use tab, which comes up automatically. And we thought that, that was a good way for people to kind of enter this sensitive but also a secure space to kind of to get an understanding of the kinds of processes that we have been involved in, but also to hear some of the stories and some of the talks and so on. So within the like website itself, we have a lot of like photographs as well as talks of the different activities that we have been kind of undertaking since 2020. And here, of course, the first public lecture given by our own Dolly Kikon, talking about the kind of repatriation and the healing of the land. So the like photographic archive is here, but there's also a like video archive present within the like website that you can search. We've also been kind of keeping track of all of the things that we have been doing, and of course, like recently in December, we had a panel kind of around like repatriation, and where we involved different kind of academics, kind of as well as civil society like members to talk, to kind of reflect a bit more on the kind of repatriation as a like Naga process, and what does that mean and what does that look like. One of the important things that the RRaD team has done is also to give a like media orientation session to how does the like media approach questions around ancestral remains, and how do you kind of represent that in a kind of ethically sensitive manner. And here, of course, like Dolly is leading the session kind of alongside other RRaD like members in talking a bit more about how do we kind of disseminate all of this like sensitive information to the public, and to what extent should the like media be also aware of some of the issues that we have been talking about. So I mean, if you're interested to explore, I mean, there is a really useful kind of editorial section that collates all the different op-eds like which have been appearing in the different like newspapers, and I think it is really like useful. And of course, all of the op-eds are from kind of like local like newspapers, in response to some of the things that we have been like bringing up, in terms of heritage, in terms of museums, in terms of ancestral remains, and so on. So kind of explore that. I think it's a really good kind of resource and helps us understand some of the ways in which we think about the like repatriation process. The second thing that I want to talk about is the graphic novel. Now, here, of course, again, we have been influenced a lot by the Nagpura comics. I don't know if you have seen the Nagpura comics, but the first one is open access, is available. The second one is not yet open access, but we wanted to create something like this, which is kind of visually rich, that plays around with the landscape of the people, that kind of introduces animals, foods, and colors, but also at the same time make it accessible to the public. Now, the Nagpura comics are great, and I really, really enjoyed them, but they had a lot of information in there about the laws, about this law and about that law. And so, I wanted to create something quite kind of simple in terms of narrative, and also in terms of storytelling. So according to one of the kind of illustrators, John, says that kind of applied comics can do three important things when, sorry, my screen is blocking the quote. So when it comes to conveying information, one, they can show as well as tell, making it easy to decomplicate unfamiliar subject matter without resorting to dumbing down. And three, help ground and humanize the subject by using narrative and storytelling. So it was this particular kind of approach that really appealed to us, primarily as we were thinking about how do we do a story about the ancestral remains, questions around colonization, decolonization in the graphic style and through storytelling. So the artist is called Murin Imchin, and if you're interested to work with him, please send me an email, and I will surely introduce him to you, because he's an excellent illustrator. And we came up with the storyline about how do we present this, and we thought about starting it in a kind of maybe a village scene, a town scene, and primarily with the grandmother and the granddaughter while I'm having a talk over the kitchen hearth, because that is a very familiar, safe kind of homely feel that so many Nagas would associate, right? So he sketched it quickly, and then we talked about the colors, we talked about the settings, and then he inked it, and then voila, he colored it, and kind of immediately, we could, I could see that the story was going to kind of flow from here. Now, the kind of important things about the characters, the characters, so the grandmother is the kind of knowledge keeper, right? She's the one who has heard about, some of the experiences of the Britishers, and kind of remembers these stories. And the granddaughter is the inquisitive child, who is asking the grandmother about, what happened to this, what happened to repatriation, objects, human remains, and so on. And I wanted to base the characters kind of around kind of natural things around the environment. So the granddaughter is named Ali. So Ali is in Ao, it means earth. And of course, we've got other characters who are called Bove, which is an old tree, or Kimere, which is a fire, or Sirala, which is star. So I wanted to evoke this sense of the eternal kind of landscape around us, and how these characters are kind of actually representing that. Here again is a quick sketch of the colonial encounter, as it were, with the British talking to the Naga villages, and the grandmother here is telling the story about how these encounters actually happen, and what she remembers, and also what she saw as a young child. This clip again takes you to the post-independence India, and I think this is an important part that, of course, Dolly was also talking about, the kind of militarization, right? So of course we had the British experience in the kind of mid 19th century onwards, but then since 1947, it's the presence of the Indian kind of occupation and the Indian military. So here, of course, the trucks are coming in sneaking into these kind of villages with their like guns and so on. That again shows us another layer of colonization kind of happening. But also, I mean, I wanted this like Naga story to not only be focused on the British and the Indians, but also the events happening around during that time. So of course, the Second World War is kind of referenced here with the kind of Japanese planes coming, because of course they came all the way to Imphal, kind of occupied Imphal, and they came up to the like Naga Hills. And of course, people are probably aware of the like Battle of Koima, where the Japanese and the Allied they like fought, and well, of course, the Allies kind of won the war. So giving a sense of the kind of larger events at play, but also the complex question around like Naga like nationalism that most of the like readers will be aware of, is to talk a bit more about what does the Naga national movement mean. And here I think the characters are also quite complex and kind of nuanced in their like views. The son here is quite kind of unsure about all of this, this kind of repatriation. And of course he's talking about well, we've got so many other things to think about, like bad roads and like corrupt well, officials and like government, and why this on top of everything else. So the process in which we came up with the story is also a process that people have called kind of ethnographic. So we have done some interviews, we have done some like field work, and depending on what people have said to us, and we have tried to kind of represent that, like visually kind of in the stories that we are telling. Shift to the Pitt Rivers Museum, I thought, well, you should see this this artist's rendition of the Pitt Rivers Museum. And I think it is also important to say that the Pitt Rivers Museum have been truly collaborating with us and have been co-partnering in this process. And their involvement is also an important part of how we have come thus far. And here, I mean, of course, there's a sketch of like Laura as well, and of course like Dolly and the like members of the FNR that you will see, I mean, who were important in kind of facilitating some of the like discussions around the human remains that led to the formation of like RRaD. Quickly, I mean, I know that my time is like running out, but just wanted to also reflect on the transnational, international, and the global aspect of all of this, right? So of course, the like Maasai, and here we have the like Maoris, and of course, we've also been talking to different groups, about this process and understanding it, because as like Dolly have said, we have no map, but we have lots of goodwill. And people around the world have been so generous with their time, speaking to us, giving us advice, guiding us, and so on. So we wanted to kind of emphasize this kind of repatriation process as a global partnership between different institutions, but also like between Indigenous peoples and their experience. Some of the issues to do with the complexity of the like human remains, I mean, is the representation of the church. And of course, the like Nagas, some people might be aware, is a very Christian dominated like landscape. So I think questions around like burial as well as kind of repatriation have come up a lot. So we try to kind of represent that with the three characters speaking outside of the church, kind of in terms of, what does it mean to be human? How do we bring in, say, like Christianity and the church, within this kind of discourse, but also thinking about the life cycle of the like value of humans and the flourishing of humans, and of course, through events like birth, like marriage, and of course, like death. So trying to connect, at a very personal level with issues around this kind of repatriation and what does it mean to be human. And here, of course, the like youngsters are talking on like WhatsApp, about this. And here in this context, again, quickly, like we introduced this idea of decolonization. And decolonization is such a difficult topic to try and explain like visually, I think. So the artist and I, we talked about how maybe we could introduce akune. So akune is like fermented soya bean, which is very stinky, right? And it smells. And traditionally akune, I mean, eating kind of akune has been seen as a savage practice or kind of like dehumanizing and all of that. But we try and present it in such a way that kind of eating akune should be celebrated, and that process we kind of explain through this like visuals is the process of decolonization. I don't know how like persuasive that example is, but I think it kind of like kind of illustrates the point, I guess. And here we go back to the history. I mean, we go back to our stories. I think one of the things that we have come across in the repatriation process is that we have no like memories about these events, right? You know, these events happened 100 years ago, and our generation, we don't remember about these things. So it was partly to play around with like memory and how the community like remembers, and how the like landscape actually like remembers, and how the landscape then tells us stories, and how we in turn then also tell stories, right? So like looking at this kind of ancestrals and kind of ancestors, you know, overlooking, but also how the landscape is constantly shaping our like memories and our you know histories, is something that we wanted to evoke. So I just want to kind of end with this kind of landscape where, well, there is hope, you know, beyond, with the sun kind of rise. And I think the grandmother here is talking about, you know, that, you know, understanding these events have been kind of important, but the important thing is that, you know, that I can share this with you, and this gives me strength to face what's coming, because this is not only about an individual, but it's about the many. Thank you.
Thank you.